In this lecture, we will be covering Chapter 15 over persuasive presentations. Persuasion is a message that is designed to strategically induce a change in an audience. Just like there was with an informative speech, you have an immediate purpose, something you want your audience to do immediately after your speech, but there's also a long-term goal. And the long-range goal is that which you want your audience to do down the road. What do you want them to do with the information after the speech is over? A couple of things that persuasion is not, and sometimes we confuse these things and think they are persuasion, but persuasion is not coercion. Coercion is where you try to get somebody to do something against their will, either by threat or implying that if they don't do something that you want them to do, then something bad will happen to them. The second is by manipulation. What manipulation basically is you try to get somebody to do something by tricking them, some kind of fraudulent practice. So if you think in terms of some of the internet scams and some of the telephone scams that come up, this basically is manipulation. You're trying to get something done by fooling people or lying to people. So it's important for us, especially in our day and age, to be able to persuade effectively. And so one of the things you want to be clear on is what is the persuasive purpose and how do you reveal that to your audience. Another thing important to keep in mind here is that you always want to analyze your audience. You want to know if your audience is going to be in favor of your ideas. You want to know if your audience is going to be hostile toward your ideas, or you want to know if your audience is going to be neutral. We also mentioned here the boomerang effect. What the boomerang effect basically is that an audience likes you less after your presentation and after your likes you less and your message after you've done it. Well, what causes the boomerang effect? Basically, one of the causes of the boomerang effect mentioned in the text is trying to overload your audience with your purpose. Basically trying again to force them to do something or trying to over-persuade them. When we talk about persuasion, we also talk about persuasive purposes. There are four basic persuasive purposes. The first is continuance. The second is deterrence. The third is adoption. And the fourth is discontinuance. Continuance basically means is that something that is already in place is something you want to continue. So for example, when we go to vote, oftentimes there are ballot measures there are oftentimes ballot measures which are for mill levies or for tax dollars. These policies have already been put in place, and you're asked as a voter to determine whether or not you want to continue that process. Or think more likely like this. Two people are thinking about buying a car, and one person wants to keep the car that you have while the other person wants a new car. So the one who wants to keep the car wants to continue with that car. The second is deterrence. And what deterrence means is trying to prevent something from happening. So advertisements that deal with anti-smoking or anti-drinking, anti-drugs, or even anti-text messaging are really a deterrent. They're trying to keep you from doing these things. The third is adoption. You want to put in some kind of new policy or new practice. And the fourth is discontinuance. Something that is already in place, you want to discontinue it. So this could be a policy, an action, a behavior, anything like that could be a persuasive purpose. So one of the benefits of persuasion, or a good way to persuade, is face-to-face. As the slide says, it's the most effective mode of communication. So in-person is more powerful than other kinds of audience. And also to be aware is your audience a captive audience and not voluntary? Captive audiences are, of course, more difficult to persuade. Okay, persuasion and argument. A persuasion is the attempt to change how somebody acts, what somebody believes, what somebody thinks, or how somebody feels. An argument, on the other hand, is a proposition that asserts some kind of course of action. So an argument is not necessarily a disagreement on something, but an argument is a claim that you're making for some kind of course of action. And as such, there are three basic propositions. A proposition of fact is a proposition that something did or did not happen, or when something happened or did not happen. The second is a proposition of value. Is something good or bad? Is it worthwhile or is it not worthwhile? And the third is a proposition of policy. What a proposition of policy is a proposition to either change a rule or to bring a rule into effect. Another couple of terms we want to consider for a moment here are the terms evidence and proof. Evidence are facts that support a claim. And so, as you probably well know, evidence can be facts, statistics, it can be physical evidence, it can be testimony or eyewitnesses. All of those things can be used as evidence. Second term that we want to consider for a moment is this word proof. What a proof is evidence that the receiver believes in order to be true. And you may want to look over the top tests of evidence that is found in your textbook. Now, going back to the time of Aristotle, Aristotle was the one who basically wrote the book and really taught us how to persuade, and his instruction that happened in ancient Greece are still applicable to public speaking today. And what Aristotle said was there are basically two types of proof. The first type of proof is what he termed non-artistic. So what a non-artistic proof is, it's evidence, it's facts, it's eyewitness testimony, it's something that cannot be easily disputed or disputed at all. It's not anything that the speaker themselves have to formulate and have to come up with. On the other hand is artistic proofs. And these are proofs that a speaker needs to create or needs to build in order to be persuasive. And Aristotle identified three types of artistic proofs. The first is logos, or reasoning, logic. The second is ethos, or credibility. And the third is pathos, or the use of emotion. And there are two basic types of reasoning or logic. The first is deductive argument. And if you are familiar with the syllogism, you are familiar with deductive argument. Deductive argument starts with a major premise, that something is true. A minor premise is that it applies to a single case, and the third is conclusion. Another way of saying this is, if A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. So in this case, we could say that all human beings are mortal. That would be our major premise. It says all human beings. It applies to everyone in particular, or everything, every situation in particular. The minor premise would be Fred is a human being. It applies to one individual. And the third is the conclusion. Therefore, Fred is mortal. And in order for the conclusion to be true, both the major premise and the minor premise have to be true. The second type of logic or reasoning is inductive reasoning. And inductive reasoning is when you provide enough specific instances for the listener to make an inferential leap or a generalization. Going back to what we talked about when we talked about deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is concerned with truth. And so you go from a very general idea to a specific case. Inductive reasoning kind of turns that around. With inductive reasoning, you're going from specific cases to make a general application or a probability. So if you think in terms of the scientific method, and think in terms of statistics or surveys that people do, they get a sample audience, and based upon that sample, they're making an inference that is going to be true of the general population, provided that the sample reflects the general population. So, for example, if you did a series of experiments and you said in 9 cases out of 10 this happened, therefore we predict that this is the cause or this is the reason that it happens. So inductive reasoning deals not with truth, but with probability. That based upon specific examples, we then make a general conclusion. The second type of proof is ethos or credibility. And here we are referring more to the speaker's credibility. And we talked a lot about this when we went through chapter 11 on research and credibility and using credible sources. But here we're dealing with the credibility, more with the credibility of the speaker. And we want to look at 2 things dealing with the speaker's credibility. The first thing we want to consider is the speaker's qualifications. Why are they qualified, or is she or he qualified to speak on this message? Why should we listen to this particular person? But the second is, can we trust this person? Can we relate to this person? Do we have a common purpose or a common bond, common ground with this person? So that's really what ethos deals with. And this is part of an argument. It's not the argument all of itself. Somebody can be very trustworthy, but that credibility has to be set in the larger scheme of things as a speaker. The third type of proof is called pathos. And what pathos is it is an emotional proof. We can use pathos in negative ways, and we can use pathos in very positive ways. You can use pathos as part of a narrative, or you can appeal to people's emotions or their fear. And so all sorts of imagery, even like you see here in this picture, is meant to convey some kind of emotion, some kind of pathos that's going to call our attention to that. So, for example, if you think in terms of some of the shelters and organizations that take in deserted pets. You know, it's the showing of the pets, it's the display of the animals, it's the music that's in the background that is supposed to elicit some kind of emotional response from us so that we will adopt a pet. Those are pathos or emotional appeals. One of the things I want you to be aware of, and this is a very important process for you to think of when you're doing your persuasive speech, and that's called the Monroe Motivational Sequence. I have placed a video about the Monroe Motivational Sequence on Canvas that you can look at, or on Moodle. And basically there are 5 parts to the motivational sequence. The first is attention, the second is need, the third is satisfaction, the fourth is visualization, and the fifth is some kind of call to action. basically what the attention stage is basically that is your introduction. And just like you would use an attention getter in an informative speech, you use this in order to get your audience's attention, to bring them into the conversation. The need is really where your core is in starting your presentation. You want to establish some kind of need for your audience. If you think in terms of shows like the Shark Tank, you will see that that's how they do it. The first thing is they come out on stage and they have something that's going to get their audience's attention. Then they start talking about some kind of need of that, and then they show their product and how their product or their idea satisfies the need. The next step is visualization, helping your audience to see within their own mind's eye how this will work for them and how their life will be better. If you think in terms of an architect trying to persuade a client to adopt their plans for a new building or some kind of subdivision, what they do is they create a model so that you can actually see what it's going to look like. So here in this step is you are visualizing it for them. You're creating that image within their own mind's eye for them to see how your idea is going to be beneficial for them. And the final stage is the call to action. I call this the bottom line. This is where the salesperson wants to make the sale. And so here is where you tell your audience what you want from them or what you want them to do. This is the call to action. There's a little bit more detail here on the motivational sequence that you can look at. And then there is also ethical considerations. And these things, of course, apply just like they did to your informative speeches. Make sure that you cite your sources accurately. Make sure that you respect your sources. Make sure you respect your audience. And make sure that if you're in a conversation or debate, that you also show respect for your opponent. All right, so that is our presentation for today. I hope this is helpful. Use this presentation as you go back through Chapter 15, and you not only prepare for your persuasive presentations, but you prepare for any examination or quizzes that we may have on this chapter.